Good morning. How are you, Susan?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. So, after we spoke last time, people have been asking about the comment you made about what had occurred previously with a complaint you filed related to students that are receiving or should be receiving education if they are charged with a crime. And I thought that would be a great topic to dive into today if you're comfortable telling that story a little bit.
I'm happy to, and I actually feel like we're having a little deja vu.
Right?
Um, yeah, it's like these issues that we tackle never are really resolved; they just come back full circle. Um, so, you want me to give people a little bit of background of what happened, 10 years ago? A little bit
Was it 10
longer.
years already?
It's been close to that.
Wow,
So, let,
yeah.
so
Please.
let me. So let's preface this that as usual for us, we're talking about Sarasota County, Florida, where we live. Although these issues are local for us, I think that these are topics every community deals with.
Mhm.
So back in 2011, so it's been more than 10 years ago, our local court system here is the 12th Circuit, and it comprises Sarasota County, Manatee County, and DeSoto County. So three counties here locally are under one circuit. And there was a group that was formed, and I was not part of it back then, that was looking at youth who were often minors under 18, but they had been charged with a crime and were being considered adults. So they were awaiting sentencing or awaiting trial, actually, and sitting in an adult jail correctional facility in one of the counties in our circuit. And there was some concern because these children were entitled to continue to receive education services while they were awaiting adjudication. And there was a group of concerned citizens, members of the sheriff's department, members of the county governments, nonprofits, who were all looking at this group of children and making sure to ensure that they were getting education services that they needed. And so they started having meetings, like these joint meetings of all these different folks back in 2011. And sorry,
Sorry.
there was the feedback.
Somebody
And
just me, sorry.
so they for the last 2 years, over the course of 2 years, they really looked at who was governing correctional facilities and who was responsible for providing education to these kids, because it was cloudy. There were a lot of jurisdictions that overlapped, a lot of agencies that overlapped. So they were trying to figure out who was responsible for making sure kids got educated. So in 2013, so 2 years later, because nothing in that we do that's committee based ever moves quickly, much to your chagrin. Um, they invited representatives from Manatee County and Sarasota County schools to be part of this group and to present to the group about what was happening in each of the counties as far as providing education for these students. So Manatee County, let's start with them. They had a long-standing agreement with their sheriff's office in order to provide educational services in the jail. And all of the youth in grades 9 through 12 who were under the 18 or under received 4.5 hours per day of classes during the regular school year. And there was a contract in place, a memorandum of understanding between the agencies that the jail would provide the location and the facilities, and the school district would provide the educators and the materials. And collaboratively, they would make sure that this group of kids, and I mean, that we should note, this was usually a pretty small group of kids, like 15, 20 students. It's not a huge group of kids, but they're a really vulnerable, risky group of kids. Like they, not often had disabilities, often their education experience to date had not been stellar. And so now they're at this place at a very young age where they are involved with, law enforcement and sitting in jail. And so even if they eventually get convicted, because they're so young, at some point, more than likely, we're going to have them back in our communities. And we need to look at recidivism, and if they exit jail, what happens then. So continuing to educate young children who are involved with law enforcement is vital for the community's sake and for their sake long term.
And they're charged. They're simply charged with a crime.
They're charged with a crime. At this point, they have not been adjudicated or found guilty of a crime. They're often, they haven't made bail for whatever reason. They can sit in an adult jail charged for up to 11 months, 29 days. And so, some of these children do sit in there for months and months and months awaiting trial. And so again, it is required that we continue to educate these students while they're being held in jail.
Required by
Federal law.
federal law.
Federal law. And so then we had Sarasota County. Manatee County, we know what they're doing. They have their understanding. Their kids are getting educated 4.5 hours a day. And not to say that there weren't issues of like, are they certified, highly qualified teachers? What is the materials they're being presented with? Are they appropriate? I mean, those kind of questions, but services were being delivered. And then we get to Sarasota County, and we realize that there's not a formal agreement in place between the school system and the jail. And so 2 representatives of this committee in September of 2014 meet with the then superintendent of schools, Lori White, and the executive director of exceptional student education, Sonia Figueredo Alberts, and another employee who was in that ESE department at the time. And so Mrs. White at that time stated that the lack of general education services would be immediately addressed, and a general ed teacher would be providing services at the jail. And at that meeting, the committee presented Mrs. White with a copy of a report from the Southern Poverty Law Center regarding an agreement that had been reached in a different county in Florida, Polk County, because they were found to not be providing appropriate education services for their youth there. And so there was a legal proceeding, and they came up with an agreement of what they would do in Polk County to make sure kids were getting services. So they, the citizens on the direct file committee made sure that our school district here in Sarasota understood what Polk had gone through and how they were deciding to rectify the problem. So then the representative from the school district started attending this direct file committee and became part of it. And what they reported was they had decided a general education teacher would be providing 4 hours per week of services at the jail, and that they would leave work for the kids to do in between visits. So remember, Manatee County, 4.5 hours a day. Sarasota County, 4 hours per week. So a pretty drastic difference even once the problem came forward. And then we found out that our ESE students who have individual education plans, and don't forget, lots of people who go to jail have disabilities. And I'm going to actually pop a screen up for just a minute. Let's see if I can get to it. Here we go. And this is a report from the U.S. Department of Justice from 2016, and they did a survey of prisoners, prison inmates, and they wanted to figure out what was the prevalence of disabilities among state and federal prisoners. And so any disability, including hearing, vision, cognitive, ambulatory, self-care, independent living, is the first bar on this chart. And what they found was over 35% of prisoners self-identified as having a disability. So it's a huge number. And then when they look at cognitive disabilities, it was 24%. So so among all prisoners, 24% reported that a doctor, psychologist, or teacher had told them at some point in their life that they had attention deficit disorder. And nearly a quarter of all prisoners reported participating in special education classes. So the overlap between students with disabilities and people who are incarcerated is much larger percentage than the general percentage of people in the country that have, receive special education services. Do you have any questions so far, Sue? No, this makes sense. So in April of 2015 is when I became aware of this problem. So this committee had been meeting since 2011. I, at that time, had no idea that we had students, youth, who were in adult jails. Just had no idea that was a thing. But I was friends with someone in our community who did mentoring, and she visited kids in jail, and she was the chair of this committee at the time. And she reached out to me to say, I go to the jail and I talk to the kids, and they just aren't getting the services that they need.
Well, and wasn't she involved in one of our local nonprofits, Big Brothers Big Sisters?
She
So
was involved in one of our local nonprofits. She made a tremendous impact on the lives of so many of the kids in our community, and a positive force for change.
right, and I will stop you because somebody's asking a question about the study saying that it was 18 and older, and I believe the study did say that, and what we'll see in just a minute, Asmar, is I don't think lots of people were aware that we had students sitting in jails not receiving any education. Young children sitting in adult jails waiting to have their day in court.
Right. Yeah. No, the statistic I was giving was not specific to youth. This was just a general population of people in prison, and how many of them came from, had a disability background when they were kids in school. And so making sure that we're serving children when they're young is vital, because we know where these kids wind up when they don't get appropriate services. So anyway, in 2015, I personally became involved with this group, and I was like, what do you mean we have young kids sitting in jail and they're not getting services, and there's no agreement between the school district and the sheriff? Like, truly, I was like, how could this be? So I started doing some research because it was a topic I knew nothing about. I'd never, had a family that called me and said, hey, my kid's sitting in jail and they're not getting their IEP served. It was just never a group that had reached out to me. And so I found, as I did my research, a letter, a Dear Colleague letter, which is formal guidance that comes out from the federal government on topics that they get a lot of questions about. that people are like, this issue happens and we don't quite understand the law and what we're supposed to do. And so this, the Office of Special Education Programs, OSEP, and the Office of Special Education Rehabilitative Services, OSERS, provide these Dear Colleague letters. And this one happened to be a joint letter that they issued in December of 2014. So it was very timely. As this group was looking at this issue, the federal government obviously was getting a lot of concern because they issued this Dear Colleague letter. And so here it is.
And before you go, there's just someone asking a question to clarify. These youths don't go to adult state prisons. They go to the county jails while they're waiting to be adjudicated.
Correct. Yes. They are sitting in the county jail.
Mhm.
And so actually, one of the things that I learned was our DJJ facilities, Department of Juvenile Justice. So if they're not charged as an adult, they would go to a DJJ facility. They have education programs in place. And if they had been found adjudicated and they had gone to adult prison, then once they're in place, there were education programs, maybe not the same as what they got in school, but there was like GED programs. There were things available, education services, once they became a prisoner. This is that in between gray area where these are youth who are what they call direct filed. So they're sitting in an adult jail awaiting adjudication and entitled to continue receiving education services. So I hope that clarifies it.
It does.
So anyway, the U.S. Department of Education, OSERS, issued this Dear Colleague letter in December of 2014, providing guidance of what states and local municipalities were required to do to serve youth in jails. And so anybody that's interested in this letter, you can Google the December 5th, 2014 Dear Colleague letter, and it will pop up for you. And I'm not going to go through and read it here, but just know that this is sort of what guided the questions that our committee started to ask, to say this is what is required. What are we doing here locally? And is it in compliance with the expectations? So the next thing that I did was I called the Florida Department of Education. And I talked to someone up there who was a program specialist. I was referred to, his name was Jerry Brown. And when I talked to Mr. Brown, and I was like, these kids are getting maybe 1 to 4 hours per week of services, maybe. Who's responsible for monitoring compliance in the jails? Because it was very clear in this Dear Colleague letter that because these youth are transitioning between being in school and maybe being out of school and then being held in jail, and then maybe they get out of jail, and where do they land while they're waiting their court date? And then like they just have a lot of transition in their lives happening. And so in addition to the county being responsible for providing the education, the state has a responsibility for oversight and making sure that these students are getting the education they're entitled to. And so I was like, who does this for the state of Florida? And first they sent me to the DJJ guy. And I talked to him and he was very nice, but he was like, it isn't me. Like, this is not a DJJ facility. These are local jails. That is not my area of responsibility. And so then he had a meeting with his superiors, Mr. Brown did. And when they got back to me, they were like, here's the problem we have. Nobody, they couldn't figure out who was monitoring this process. It was so frustrating like, it was past the hot potato. Not me, not me. um, and so he said to me, I really think we need to have a conference call with the bureau chief. And the person in charge at the time was Monica Vera Tirado, and she was the bureau chief for exceptional student education. So they scheduled a call with her and Jerry Brown and me and the person who was chairing the direct file subcommittee. And this was at the end of May. And we waited and we waited and we waited some more, and nobody called. So we called the Florida Department of Education and we're like, what's going on? We have this call and we're waiting. And they said, oh, Mr. Brown's not in today. And, we don't have this call scheduled. And so they just didn't show up.
Shows priorities, doesn't it?
It does. And so at that point, we were like, what do we do? The district, we've met with them. They, the committee had met with the superintendent and it still wasn't resolved. We called the oversight group at the state, and they don't even know who's supposed to be doing oversight and won't even return, come to a call that they scheduled. And so we reading through this Dear Colleague letter, realized that our only alternative was going to be to file a grievance, a formal grievance through the U.S. Department of Education. So it gets me frustrated just talking about it. It was Memorial Day weekend. It stands out in my mind because it was that Friday of Memorial Day. And we were trying to figure out what to do. And so I was like, well, there's a name on this Dear Colleague letter. Maybe they can help. And so we called Washington, D.C. And shocking to me, Dr. Curtis Kennard answered his phone on a Friday afternoon before Memorial Day and listened to what we had to say. And he was like, we can take a grievance report from you. And we need you to formally tell us what the problem is before we can do anything about it. So we spent time and eventually wrote an OSEP complaint, and we filed it on behalf of the youth in jail against Sarasota County specifically and the Florida Department of Education for not having appropriate oversight. Now, anybody that's, gone this route and filed federal complaints, just know they have to take the complaint. They don't actually have to do anything with it. They don't have to tell you what they're doing with it. So it's sort of like a black hole that you send things into and then you're out of the loop. It's not like they call and give you an update. Hey, we're doing this. So
we see it all the time.
Yeah. So there was a period of time where we just didn't know what was happening. But they did, Sarasota County Schools did schedule a meeting with the direct file group, and there was Sonia Figueredo Alberts was involved. Todd's last name's escaping me.
Bowden, how do you say? Yeah. He ended up being our superintendent at one point.
He did, but he wasn't the superintendent at this point. He was in charge actually of the technical school, and they had an agreement with the jail to provide services to adults in jail who were looking to continue their education. So either to get their GED. So though he was in charge of the people going into the jail for those services, but it was not the folks responsible for providing for this ESE group of kids.
But what year was it?
This was 2015. So we had a meeting, and And we walked away from this meeting feeling like we'd heard, and that they were going to put, they had already had somebody assigned that reported to Sonia to be part of the direct file subcommittee. Also somebody who went to court and made sure like that we knew about these students who were landing in the adult jail. So that connection was put in place. And then that person was responsible for contracting with educators to go in and provide services to the youth in jail. So we never heard anything directly from the U.S. Department of Education, but we know something happened because, and let me get you the next thing that appeared. Oh, that wasn't what I wanted to do. The next thing you know, in September of 2016, the Florida Department of Education holds a meeting for administrators, their AMM or administrators management meeting. And this was pretty normal. They have these at the beginning of every school year. What every ESE director should know about their responsibilities for students with disabilities in Department of Juvenile Justice programs and adult county jails and prisons. So obviously the message had been heard that there was a problem in Florida because the Florida Department of Education issued this guidance. And so if we go to, I'm going to go backwards because we're at the end of it, page 55, we get their slides that they presented about adult and county jails and prisons. So you have an ESE director, and that director is supposed to have the link to the adult county jails and prisons. Students in your DJJ, which is not what we're talking about, is that middle thing. So what we're talking about today is the bottom, the adult county jails and prisons. And so what they're just 3 bullet points. A growing number of juvenile offenders are being placed in local jails or adult detention and considered direct file status. Any student that's categorized as direct file is not in the DJJ system. And then although the student's charges, care, and custody are being handled through the adult detention system, their educational needs and services are still the responsibility of the districts in which they are housed. And so there's a few more slides that go through the federal law with them and why they're responsible for making sure these children are being educated. So that, we were thrilled when that came out. We felt like now there's at least state oversight. The county had put a memorandum of understanding in place. And honestly, I, stayed on that committee for a while yet, but my involvement in what needed to be done was over. And that was sort of the last that I heard of youth in jails, and nobody had, raised their hand and said, this isn't happening. And so I just made the assumption that things were going okay because I hadn't heard any different.
Well, not only that, but the names you mentioned are people that are still involved. So Monica, although she's not the bureau chief anymore, she's doing something in Hillsborough County. Hillsborough County is where our school board hired our current superintendent from. And didn't I notice at one point that Tim Enos was part of this group?
He was. He's a current school board member,
In
but
Sarasota.
In Sarasota, but at the time he worked for the Sarasota County Sheriff's Department, and he was the sheriff's representative on the direct file subcommittee. So yes, he is very, this is a topic he knows well.
Right. And he's currently on our school board in Sarasota. And which leads us to what recently happened in Sarasota. Would you agree, Susan, or is there more you want to share about how we got here?
Now, I think that's just the background, and that was sort of like a long introduction for people to understand that this is a long-standing issue, and that it's something that has risen to the level of the federal government needing to provide guidance and oversight, that the state should be aware, the county should be aware. Everybody should, if something goes wrong, everybody should be paying attention, because we've certainly addressed this issue in a big way in the past. I think that's what's important for people to know.
I agree. Well, what has recently happened in Sarasota, I think, and if you could help me through the documents, there was an investigation that began in May, which resulted in an arrest of 2 educators in Sarasota County that were contracted to provide services to these same students that we're talking about. So here's one of the teachers, and he is charged with, can we get to that?
Scroll down.
There you go, grand theft, 20,000 or more, less than 100,000, and fraud, swindle, obtaining property, 20,000 less than $50,000. And I think, and there's another teacher. Same charges. So what's the arresting date? The release date was July 18th. Were they arrested on July 18th also?
They're going to be arraigned in August. Let's see. Arrest date 7/18.
So I think the part about this I'd like to go through, Susan, if we can, is the investigation and what occurred in the probable cause affidavits. And for anybody interested, this is all public record. You can go to the clerk's website, you can read it, you can see it. And if you scroll down to just the narrative is what I'd like to share.
All
So
right.
the narrative was on June 20th, 2024 for this particular teacher. And what it says is, and I won't read word by word, just key points here. There was a human resource investigator. Her name is Brooke. I don't know if I'm mispronouncing this, Cambria, at Sarasota County School District. And she was investigating Steve Hazuda, who is the defendant in this case. And what she said is he was contracted to provide instructional services to juveniles at the jail and students that are hospital homebound. This contract has set policies that are to be followed, documenting the time spent providing services. These policies specifically require the provider to log in the exact time spent teaching at the facility or at the home. So for those of you that don't know, hospital homebound services to students in Sarasota County, it's a process you go through at an IEP meeting. There's students who are ill or for whatever reason cannot attend school, and typically ill or a medical diagnosis. But those students are entitled to education, and Mr. Hazuda was contracted to deliver that education. And the affidavit continues to go on to say that the sheriff's office provided defendants sign in and sign out records of the jail dating back to 2018. So he had been delivering services back to 2018, it appears. he had submitted extra duty days for the entire time range for both the jail and hospital homebound services. So of that time, these records that the district, someone at the district chose to analyze were school year 23-24 and 22-23. And then it said the investigation gathered both closed and active jail contracts from July of 23 to present as it pertains to the defendant. So that's a little bit confusing to me. I don't know if you can shed any light on that, Susan, but I don't know how you analyze the 22-23 school year if they analyze the contract starting in July of 23.
I have no, like the periods of time don't make any sense to me. I have no idea what they did.
Right. So it says it was found that the defendant also submitted logs for hospital homebound and home instruction contracts during the same time period. So that also is unclear. Is it just that consolidated amount of time or since 2018? I don't know, but it says in total, the defendant submitted falsified time records for approximately $15,192.32 in the 23-24 school year for time that was not worked. The number would have been higher. However, contract payments were stopped in May of 24 due to this investigation, and final payouts were not made. Additionally, as seen in the attached spreadsheet, very conservative numbers were used to make the approximate calculations. So we don't see the attached spreadsheet, but by their own admission, they use conservative numbers. And then for the 22-23 school year, what they are charging is falsified time for approximately $5,900 and some dollars. So the total amount of time is $21,162.56. So that is the charge for Mr. Azuda related to services that he was paid for and allegedly not provided, which is shocking to me.
I agree with you that it's shocking. And so interesting too, down at the bottom, they give you a definition of the charges and what they mean.
Do you want to read through those?
Well, I just think, the defendant did so knowingly obtains or use or endeavored to obtain or to use the property of another with intent to either temporarily or permanently A, deprive the other person of a right to the property or a benefit from the property, or B, appropriate the property to his or her own use or the use of any person not entitled to the use of the property. So that's the grand theft charge. And then a scheme to defraud. The defendant did so scheme to defraud, which means a systematic, ongoing course of conduct with intent to defraud one or more persons, the school board, or with intent to obtain property from one or more persons by false or fraudulent pretenses, representations, or promises, or willful misrepresentations of a future act. Interesting that there are no charges for the harm to the victims that he didn't deliver the service they were entitled to.
By federal. Exactly. Right. Well, and we did, well, let's go through Miss Summerly's and then we can say what we'd asked for.
So it's the same probable cause, affidavit form. And here's the narrative.
Right. Now, in the last one, didn't they say they met in, was it May? This one, they met in June 18th, and same HR investigator. And
this is longer.
Yeah. Well, this one says that, again, the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office provided the defendant's jail sign-in and out records dating back to 2018. Of these records, again, they analyzed 22-23 and 23-24. In total, the defendant submitted falsified time records electronically via Sarasota County School Board email for approximately $14,767 $2,258.71 in 22-23 for time not worked. In total, $11,743.43 in the 23-24 school year. The total for both was $26,500. The number would have been higher. However, contract payments were stopped in May 24 at the inception of the HR investigation. So they would have known there was a reason they were stopped getting paid in May, it would appear. And let's see, the part that was most shocking to me, well, a couple of pieces were pretty shocking to me. So her total is $26,511.14 for dates and times submitted by the defendant where she never arrived at or entered the Sarasota County Jail to provide instructional services per the contract requirements. It should also be noted that the defendant was given credit for total hours per visit, 4 hours of instructional time and 1 hour for planning time, for a total of 5 hours per visit, even if, per Sarasota County Jail records indicate, the defendant was only there for 15 minutes or 1/2 an hour.
And I thought about that, and I wonder if her contract says if she goes. So these kids come and go, and you know me, I'm always looking for the benefit of the doubt for somebody. I wonder if she shows up and not all the kids she's there to see are still there. Does she get credit for the time period she was supposed to be there working? I just wonder what her contract says is my question there.
Well, taking that a step further, it should also be noted the defendant's duty day ends at 15:30 at Taylor Ranch Elementary School, which is down in South Venice. It gives a location. It is 29.4 miles from the Sarasota County Jail, or approximately 43 minutes drive time. There are several dates where the defendant submitted payment for contracted services at the Sarasota County Jail, stating she was at the Sarasota County Jail at 1500 hours, when her duty did not end at Taylor Ranch Elementary in Venice until 15:30. If that doesn't show intent, I mean, you can go back, you can get her attendance records. Was she at school those days? You can't be in two places at one time. Where is the oversight? And why did it take years to catch that this was going on? This is absurd. You've got one job in Sarasota, that's to educate your children. How did this even happen?
And that's the pivotal question here. Like, how long did this actually go on? Who was asleep at the wheel?
Heck yeah. I've got a good friend who's a teacher and she does extra duty days at a school. And I remember not too long ago, she was having trouble getting paid. And this is when she had sheets signed by the bookkeeper. She had dotted all her I's, crossed all her T's, and she was doing the work. And it was, for whatever reason, she was having trouble getting paid. How is it sometimes we micromanage and scrutinize and have the ability to not pay people who are really working? And other times, the most insulting part to me about this is why they limited the scope of the investigation to only 2 years, and what are they doing to ensure that these students that didn't get educated, and we're talking about children on hospital homebound.
Right. Well, and that, I talked about how vulnerable our kids in jail are. These are kids who are too sick. This other group of kids, hospital homebound kids, they either have a physical disability of some sort that prevents them from going into the school building, or they may have a mental health challenge that prevents them from going into the school building. I mean, it's a very select, and I mean that you have to have a significant need in order to qualify to be on hospital homebound. And so these are kids who are desperately needing to have their education continued while they're trying to get through being ill. And those families have such a burden on them to like manage the medical component of having a sick child, much less having to try to chase down the school system to get the education your child is entitled.
Right, I agree. And the fact of the matter is, where are the checks and balances for all this? Where now we had the DOE come down and do an investigation in Sarasota County after the DJ case and said, "Go back and figure this out." And the similarities are interesting to me as you were going through the beginning, because they also provided guidance for students with significant cognitive disabilities, and they showed how if you have this disability, you can't have this eligibility. Um, so how they provide guidance means the state knows there's a problem. The state certainly knows there's a problem based on all the information you showed today. And all of the people that work in the district had been here for years and years. So we had the same ESE director until the end of last May. And this
Mhm.
shows that this was occurring under her watch. And now we've got people that work for her that have been promoted. What does it take to ring the alarm and say we've got a problem? And we don't know what that answer is.
I, I was gonna say, who's doing the checks? Like who's signing off on these on the pay?
Right.
Why isn't there anybody who's making sure that the people they've contracted with are showing up? You know,
Exactly. And
it, it
we just
and
had a
Frank,
contract compliance audit that we went through with glowing results.
and if like the hospital homebound, again, the parents I can only imagine are in distress because their kids are sick. But
Um,
I'm
yeah.
sorry.
I'm sorry, I just read someone's comment. I didn't mean to
Um,
interrupt you.
but you know, if these parents complained that the teacher didn't show up, like, did we get any of those complaints? Did anybody follow up on them? I don't have the answer to that, but it's a question I'd certainly want to know. And then as far as the jail, there should be a memorandum of understanding between the school district and the sheriff's office. Did anybody from the sheriff's office say, hey, nobody's showing up from the school district? Did that fall on deaf ears? Because I can tell you back when I was involved all those years ago, the sheriff's department folks were the ones going, we've got these kids and nobody's educating them. I mean, they were ringing the alarm bells just like everybody else on the committee. So what's going on here?
I agree. Please send some emails. We're trying to get some answers. We don't have any yet, but we will definitely keep you posted. What do they say? Every student, every day?
Except these,
Right. Right.
not
And
these.
it just befuddling why you would limit the scope of your investigation, a criminal investigation regarding educational services not delivered to children.
Yeah, and I was just checking to see if we got any answers, but hang on just a minute. I'm looking.
Nope.
Not yet. Acknowledgement that we asked.
That's correct. Correct. Well, I didn't get that from the district, but
But I did. I was trying to figure out, is there a memorandum of understanding in place? And I at least got acknowledgement that I made the request. So we'll keep you all posted if they get back to us and let us know.
well,
Go ahead.
I was just going to thank you so much for giving the history of how we got to where we are. And certainly you are not employed by any of these agencies, not making money by any of these agencies. And Oh, I'm sorry. Somebody is just commenting to me that they wonder if it's a who you know in the district. I think that was back related to my point of somebody really had to be scrutinized to get paid, and other people for years can get compensated without actually doing the work. Um,
Well, I think what really the point there is the inconsistencies in policies and how when we don't have clear cut checks and balances and making sure that before money is dispersed, that all of the conditions of the contracts are met. Um, and who's responsible for it? And you know what? This is a big ship that they're running. And so I'm sure you're going to have problems, but who's responsible for identifying them and figuring out how to resolve them? And why the hell would it take from 2018, you know, until 2024? That's 6 years before we would identify that there's a problem. That's insane.
I
And
agree. And even when we have policies and things should happen, I can give you many examples of things that don't happen, and the people that are supposed to be ensuring that they do just act like it's another Tuesday when they don't. And we're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. So until you are a good steward of finances and you can prove to us that you are, and you can prove to us that you're educating children and moving the needle, I don't know how anybody goes back out to this community and says, we need more money. I just don't.
And as important as the money component is, because we should be good stewards of our tax dollars, we should
Mhm.
expect the agencies who are responsible should be good stewards. Um, I just want to know, how many children did this impact?
Yeah. And what are you doing? That was one of the questions we asked. What are you doing to deliver compensatory education for the students that were impacted? I mean,
Yeah,
we've been in IEP meetings with families where we've had to fight to get hospital homebound. And I guarantee you those parents knew when teachers showed up. I guarantee
absolutely.
you. So it is difficult for me to believe that nobody knew people weren't showing up when they should have been showing up. What is concerning to me is the people that would have reported it and what happened to those reports.
Right. And again, how did it go on and on and on and on and on? I
Right.
mean, that's insane.
I agree. I agree. Well, I think just bringing this out in the open and the importance of people caring about this stuff and understanding that it occurs, because families are concerned. I can tell you this week, I've talked to families who have reconsidered sending their children back to public education and have decided not to do that this year in Sarasota County. And it just saddens me because we used to be a great place to educate children. I felt that way when my kids were being educated here, but I think they've got some work to do to rein it back in and
Well,
move
that's
the
not even
needle.
our opinion. The $150,000 report that they paid for told them that they have some work to do. But,
That's
this wasn't even captured in that overview.
And it was
They
occurring, the investigation was occurring during this period of time, obviously.
right, right.
Yeah, it's
So,
shocking. Shocks the conscience. But
well,
thank
we
you.
will continue to follow up and see what we can learn. And we would really encourage anybody else who cares about this issue, ring the bell. You know, if citizens don't use their voice, then change doesn't happen.
I agree. Thank you so much, Susan.
Yep. We'll see you next time. Bye.